Ja. Unter der Tür.
Hello and most welcome to 1735 on the series.
No, we started voting now. Thank you for the cooperation.
Unnecessary noise. We will today continue with the article that we started on 1733 by Daniel T. Hutto. And more I come to understand how interesting the writings of Hutto, Fischer,
Der Kondoflug 154 nach Antalya ist nur zum Einsteigen bereit am Ausgang B49. Wir bitten zuerst nur unsere Priority-Gäste und Familien mit kleinen Kindern unter 5 Jahren nach vorne. Alle weiteren bitten wir noch um wenig Geduld, bis Ihre Boardinggruppe ausgerufen wird. Bitte halten Sie die Bordkarte und Ausweisdokumente für die letzte Kontrolle bereit. Im Namen von Condor wünschen wir Ihnen angenehmen Flug und auf Wiedersehen in Hamburg. The passengers Condor Flight 154 to Antalya is now ready for boarding at the gate B49. We kindly ask to come forward first only our priority guests and passengers traveling with small children under the age of 5. All other passengers we kindly ask to wait until your group is called. Please keep your boarding cards and your documents ready for the last inspection. And in the name of Condor, we wish a pleasant flight and goodbye in Hamburg.
This is about the picture theory, how our obsession with the picture or our captivation of a picture that underlines all understanding and leads us to sort of skew understanding in a very certain direction. As an initial quote by Hyman here, pictures wreak havoc if, when we theorize about the mind, we take them at face value. The grip on the imagination is not the grip of a tremendous hypothesis, like the Big Bang, but more like the grip of an entrancing metaphor or myth, and their influence on theory is as permanent as the language in which they are lodged. One of the most pernicious and perverse effects of pictures, as Wittgenstein observed, is that when we got a picture of our ordinary way of speaking, we are tempted to say that our way of speaking does not describe the facts as they really are. And I think that's a lot of the essence of the picture, what it does to us. It brings us to the idea that speaking is not enough. We need to go into what it refers to, what it in the long run points to. It leads to the idea of an innerness, I would say, the construction of inner mental objects. Objects that represent something out there. And as you can hear, with that doing, everything is going for it. Everything is going in that direction. Strengthening the idea of this seeable, visible objects that can be seen by something of an inner viewer, and thereby saying, I, in my inner, has thought this exact thing. This is my thinking. And on the other side of this demarcation evolves the problem of the outsideness, what the inner objects will refer to. So we also get the construction of outer objects. And this happens, I would say, simultaneously. The creation of the inner thinking objects and the outer ones. Both of them as what one could call a visibility to them. Another interesting pointer here is that our idea of common origin and also similarities strengthens the idea of that the visual object inside of oneself, the thinking that represents, that would be in the Saussurian term a sign, is in some way similar to the outside signified. And these two factors equally help to strengthen the idea or the general perception of an insideness that represents an outsideness. They need to be identical, or at least.
This is announced calling for a Neustron 2403 to Valencia. After hear this announcement, please visit the gate A42 as soon as possible. We are closing the gate now. Thank you.
And what these tendencies, amongst other things does is obscures all finer details in the understanding of what is seeing, experiencing, feeling, sensing, having an intention, having knowledge. But it's also a massive oversimplification of what is tangled, as Hutto often called it. That tangledness is between the words and what they do in the world, which is much more complex than the very simple frontier between inner and outer. That simple cut that doesn't help to further understanding, or doesn't actually give much clue to the enormous complexity that resides, so to speak, underneath a cornucopia of differences and interesting features that we just miss out on. I said that before, but Wittgenstein has no want whatsoever of taking away in being. Just, I would say, the contrary here. He likes to enforce how utterly complicated and rich the inner is. Horridge has a number of interesting, well worth noting and using labels, as he calls them. And scientism is number one, and I think that is most probably the majority stance today, the majority misconception, if you would like to go into how Wittgenstein sees this. And it's the general idea that behind everything there is a sort of explanation. This explanation is explained in thinking, but thinking as inner speech, and those amounts to concepts that you can see for your inner eye. And in this most cumbersome conception of how things are related, we get stuck. And the more we
Letzter und Ausruf für alle verbliebenen Gäste gebucht mit Konto-Flug 154 nach Antalya. Bitte kommen Sie umgehend zum Ausgang B49. Less than final call for remaining passengers booked to Antalya. Please proceed to the gate B49.
The more we go in that direction, the more stuck in that misconception we become. It is an unending directionality that doesn't seem to have an easy way out. That is one of the reasons it is very important to understand. This takes a lot of work. It will not come all of a sudden. And here we are focusing on psychology, where it gets the most, I would say, interesting results, and where the difference makes, where everything changes thanks to this tendencies right there. And here's another point, so you really get that into your head. Wittgenstein, and it's a quote from page 5, realize that what is fundamental to our practices is something that can only make itself manifest in and through the practices and activities in which we engage. Hence, he holds, we must resist holding out hope for a further explication of the nature of our form of life in the form of a philosophical theory that somehow reveals what lies behind and beneath and explains our practices. So it's in our practice where reality sort of substantiates itself, not in the visual or thinking object, neither in what it's supposed to be, because of its likeness, refers to or connects to. Neither of these two options hold really. And page 5, as I mentioned before, sorry for the tedious repetition. We also miss out in understanding the differences in the language games by deeming them under the categories of pure insideness and pure outsideness, all of the peculiarities and understanding of them simply slides out of vision, slides out of knowingness. It's a massive limitation of our knowing capacity as such. Language games and the different parts of it, they all have a point. And that's another thing that has become at least severely restricted by this coarse chopping up of the world in inner and outer. Here's another example from Setter. For example, we can only understand the nature of pain by attending to all of this circumstantial complexity. So there is a massive complexity underneath all this. It simply is blocked out of vision, out of, we cannot reach into it. Reaching into it can be compared to the everyday experience of having visual objects or artifacts of inner speech that only extremely indirectly can capture anything of that richness that is both present in the varied and multifaceted fractal outside. And I would say it's exactly in this complexity that we can find the nourishment for our souls, instead of the idea of the soul as some sort of phantom inside our bodily prison. continue the reading on page 4. Once the preceding thinking analogy was firmly in place in this characteristic framework, ideas, this is important. Ideas came to be treated as obviously true by philosophers at the time. And yet, as Fisher emphasizes, they are clearly not part of common sense. Instead, they are distinctively philosophical and, at the time, fresh intuitions shared without explicit argument by many early modern thinkers.
Sehr geehrte Fluggäste, Ihr Flug EW 7762 nach Zürich ist nun zum Einsteigen bereit. Wir bitten zunächst alle Passagiere in der Business-Class Hauptsache in das Horn einzusteigen. Danach beginnen wir mit der Gruppe 1 auf der linken Seite. Gäste der Gruppe 2 nutzen bitte die rechte Seite. Bitte halten Sie Ihre Bordkarte bereit. Im Namen von Eurowings wünschen wir Ihnen einen angenehmen Flug. Dear passengers, Eurowings flight EW 7762 to Zurich is now ready for boarding. We are now inviting business class passengers on to commitments and just to board the aircraft. We will then start with boarding group 1 on the left-hand side. Group 2 passengers, please use the right lane. Please have your boarding pass ready on behalf of Eurowings. We wish you a pleasant flight.
This is from Fisher and shows that once established somewhere, as he puts it, in the mid-17th century to
Sehr geehrte Fluggäste, Boarding for Eurowings Flug EW 7684 Düsseldorf, wegen wenigen Minuten zum Ausgang A43. Passagiere bitte davon sagen, wir uns in der Rundwählerseite einsteigen. Danach folgen Gäste der Gruppe 1 auf der rechten Seite, Gäste der Gruppe 2 nutzen bitte die linke Seite. Bitte beachten Sie, dass Passagiere der Gruppe 2 nur ein kleines Handgepäckstück mitführen dürfen. Unsere Handgepäckstücke müssen kurz und flüssig geladen werden. Dazu bitte die Zigaretten, Feuerzeugwaffen, Bauchwechsel für Handgepäck mitnehmen. For mental information, nutzen Sie bitte auch Links App.
all these things goes directly into the development of knowledge.
Okay, we continue boarding for your wings flight EW 7064 to Düsseldorf, filming shortly. Business class passenger home second member and senator will board first. Followed by passenger group 1 on the right hand side. Group 2 passenger please on the left hand side. Please note that passenger group 2 are only allowed to carry one small piece of hand baggage. Larger piece of hand baggage will be charged and checked in. Students may kindly ask you to remove e-cigarettes, lighters, batteries and power banks from your hand baggage. For further information on your flight, please do the website.
In this vein, he claims a thinker is under the spell of or adheres to a philosophical picture if he systematically makes non-intentional analogical inferences which assimilates targets to models of a conceptual metaphor. In ways the thinker knows them to be different. So being under the spell is because these things were not really spoken, it was just they were just there, so to speak, nothing expressed at the moment. It went into the 17th century as a discovery, more or less. And I like the term, it felt fresh. But this refreshing actually had all the roots, I would say, all the roots in this misunderstanding of, as we mentioned many times before, of a subject in front of object. placed in space. But it leads to certain niceties, gifts, and one of those is most definitely objectivity, or a mistaken belief in something shared. We all see the same thing. That starts the problematic idea of objects out there, and also say, so to speak, the identical twin of our thinking object, our visual object. By embracing a picture by means of an, and this is so great, unnoticed analogical thinking, common but otherwise apparently inexplicable, intuitions can be generated, and by then you have perception. This is the world we perceive. Wittgenstein is the only one that shows that even this can, so to speak, be put under closer investigation and seen to be not as natural, or objective.
Sehr geehrte Fluggäste, Flug EW 70648 zur Dorfrichtung zum Einsteigen bereit. Wir bitten zunächst alle Passagiere Hausgänger bis Platz in seiner Row einzusteigen. Danach beginnen wir mit dem Boarding der Gruppe 1 auf der rechten Seite, Gäste der Gruppe 2 auf der linken Seite. Bitte halten Sie Ihre Bordkarten bereit. Tables in the Flight JW7064220 office now ready for boarding. When inviting base class passenger Hausgänger member and senator to board the aircraft. We will then start with boarding group 1 on the right hand side. Group 2 passenger please to the left hand side. Please have your boarding pass ready on behalf of your supervision and flight.
Common, but otherwise apparently inexplicable intuitions can be generated. I think it's just grand. This is what Edward de Bono called perception, the founding background of everything, that decides in a manner quite differently from our spoken language, and in that way has a massive influence, and we have no awareness of it. It's that hidden factor.
Das ist absoluter Quatsch. Absoluter Quatsch.
Yet it should be clear that the source of such philosophical intuitions, at least in the case in question, does not stem from ordinary uses of language. As Fisher points out, it is quite new. It's a few centuries old. The freshness is what tricks us into going into the directionality of in and outer sharp divisions. Neither the pictures nor the intuitions, they inspire pieces of common sense as implicit in ordinary language. Yet again, calling on psychological theorizing once again. Fisher further augments this analysis by holding that once picture-driven reasoning has led us to a philosophical conception, belief bias effects may have us read this conception into ordinary talk. That whatever Wittgenstein might have made of Fisher's attempt to explain what lies behind picture-driven theorizing, both agree that the sorts of attachment to certain philosophical pictures and the problems that arise from picture-driven reasoning cannot be solved by finding deeper explanations. Rather, they can only be solved by means of systematic treatment. A telltale sign that a thinker is in the thrall of such picture-driven thinking is that absolute conviction that the thinker exhibits about the truth of various conclusions persists even in the face of contradictions that are thrown up by such convictions. As acknowledged by the thinker themselves. In the case in point, those prone to excessively assimilate thinking to visual perception, that means in parentheses, seeing the words, experiencing words or images, we sometimes, like an ongoing, like subtitles going text inside the head, or as in some comics you can find round rings that go to a big bubble, which is sort of a thinking bubble. Find it, and I'll start again. In that case in point, those prone to excessively assimilate thinking to visual perception find it irresistible to conclude that if thinking about something does not involve seeing something located in our environment, then it must, can you see how it's like, then it must involve seeing something located within us. I see my thoughts, or I experience them, I perceive them. Hence the positing of inner acts of perception that target inner mental objects. So here we have it established firmly and almost unmovable. Of course, to the idea that acts of perceiving really takes place in our heads, flies in the face of other things we find ordinarily obvious about perceiving. Such as the fact that perceiving is something that happens out in the open. So we perceive something from the outside to the inside in relation to public objects. Such as seeing a sunset and that giving the public character. Such acts of perceiving can be shared by others.
Mira, esa es schwarz oder nicht? Mira, Kevin. Der Kerl ist grau oder schwarz? Ja, das ist unsere Frau. Judy!
Theo, wo ist gleich unser Gateway? Wo müssen wir gleich rein?
It would take too long to spell out all of the difficulties of the inner container picture of mind generates. But for our purposes here, it suffices to note, as Forder's analysis reveals, that despite many noteworthy modification, e.g. moving away from the idea that there is literally a mind's eye that views mental objects. Many contemporary theories in the sciences of mind still embrace core elements of this venerable philosophical picture. It's all this freshness I mentioned earlier that Fischer pointed out started really to come about in the 17th century, I'd say mostly in the 18th century. It's the same thing, the same picture, but having a new form, a new format, being even more in the same stark, clear difference between outer and inner. But for our purposes here, it suffers to note, as Forder's analysis reveals, that despite many noteworthy modifications, that is moving away from the idea that there is literally a mind's eye that views mental objects. Many contemporary theories in the sciences of mind still embrace core elements of this venerable philosophical picture. For example, they are deeply committed to the idea that they literally are, this is called mental objects and processes that can be objects of scientific investigations. Because that led to the investigation of mental objects, but also, of course, of outside objects. To the extent that psychology remains attached even to these core remnants of the early modern empiricist picture of mind in a fundamental way. It is falling into a trap that lie in our language. For without a doubt, that picture gives life to unargued for, unshakable, foundational convictions and intuitions about what must be the case when it comes to thinking about the mind.
Achtung bitte, bitte Fluggast De Siker, Peters, Zink und Vardanyan, gebucht auf dem EK66 nach Dubai. Bitte kontaktieren Sie bitte die Ausgabe B53. Attention please, you are patient passengers De Siker, Peters, Singh and Vardanyan. Booked on EK60 to Dubai.
The point is that to the extent that such convictions and intuitions are operative in psychological theorizing, giving their ancestry, they are neither products of pure, untainted scientific theorizing, nor unproblematic snippets of common sense. Rather, they have their origins in analogies that arose from a certain way of philosophizing about the nature of the mind. The resulting cocktail is one that assigns picture-inspired properties to mental objects as constructed within a specific philosophical theory, and these are then presumptuously imposed from without on today's sciences of the mind. So the inner outer picture, which gained such gain during the 17th and 18th century, its freshness, its power, its energy, is now unquestioned and unthought of, going into today's sciences of the mind. So it's clearly evident through the whole lecture series and of course, led to a lot of intractable
Es wird Familie Wagenknecht angekommen mit der Erbaltik umgehen zur gemeinsamen Polizeiwache in die abgegebene Terminal 2B. Familie Wagenknecht
more to the
bitte
point
kommt umgehen zur
for all
gemeinsamen
its
Polizeiwache.
vaunted explanatory power, insisting on the existence of underlying, yet to be fully understood mental objects and processes with special properties, turns out to be, just as Wittgenstein might have anticipated, to provide little insight into the nature of minds. Indeed, we are told thinking, intentionality, concept possession, and concept individuation really are all deeply mysterious. And they really can't be allowed indefinitely to take in one another's wash. The hardness of understanding intentionality and thought isn't these days as widely advertised as the hardness of understanding consciousness. But it's quite hard enough to be getting on with. This is from Fodor. The truly committed who feel the force of these seemingly intractable mysteries, remain hopeful that answers will eventually come one day.
Achtung bitte, wir bitten einmal die Fluggäste Deseke, Peters, Singh,
Whatever what makes us such optimism,
und Karpusse
the interesting question
gebucht mit
is
Emirates
what
ehrgeizig
makes
nach Dubai
such thinkers
52
commit to the idea
kontaktieren für
that an
Fishing
answer of a
Passengers
particular
Deseke,
sort
Peters,
must be on the
Singh,
cards.
Fardanyan, and Karpusse booked an Emirates flight K60 to Dubai, contact the gate B52.
This is as clear a case as any in which philosophers feel compelled, due to attachment of a picture of mind to positive existence of queer mental object and processes, while leaving their very nature undecided. Wittgenstein is not anti-science. What he does reject is the seductive scientific view that the scientific method and outlook should dominate all thinking, that all problems and questions reduce to scientific ones. In particular, if the scientific method is not appropriate for dealing with philosophical problems of the sort that arise from conceptual confusions, then making new discoveries or acquiring deeper knowledge of phenomena through the manufacture of more elaborate theories cannot possibly solve or address them. The solution is maybe the toughest, is stop asking the question. Instead of asking the question, where are thoughts, what they are, where are they, and so on, is the one to give up. And therefore, in that wake, understanding can come to fruition and start to understand deeply, and more to the point also. Conclusion here of that. For Wittgenstein, our philosophical labor does not add to our compendium of knowledge. It yields neither scientific knowledge nor a special kind of non-scientific knowledge.
Ist das auch ein Flugzeug?
It elucidates and clarifies.
Ist das ein ganz
By putting to bed, or at least temporarily controlling certain misleading habits of thought, we can get clear our genuine conceptual commitments when thinking about psychology. Those that are integral to our everyday practices. This can be achieved on a case-by-case basis by appeal to examples that reveal the point, context, and specific character of our familiar modes of thought and talk. The positive part of philosophical work is the assembly of reminders about the context in which we actually deploy our concepts. That's where the important is, in the actual deployment. Like using a hammer, a saw, driving a car, and so forth. The role such concepts play in our practices, and the point of such practices but this kind of work is only possible if we can free ourselves from tempting but misleading pictures that systematically block our view of how we might use our psychological concepts, possible uses that lie before us in plain view. If you only have the eyes and the will to see them. So that's finally the concluding last lines of Wittgenstein and Psychology by Hutto. It shows to the picture that hides underneath, so to speak, and the tendency that nobody really managed to take a grip on or even know about. I think that makes it so incredibly enticing, so utterly interesting. Nobody even heard about it, but some things are close to others. There is a family resemblance. The idea of thinking within a container evolves into a Putnamian brain in a vat problem, but also to the idea that we are some sort of advanced computers and it would be wise to us are thinking computation or something of the sort, which is inevitably lead us into a wrong track. So it has great pertinence to the science of cognition and neurology as well. Well, I say thank you very much. Have a very pleasant morning, day, evening. And sorry for the bad